Welcome to the October meeting. Thanks everybody for joining us. A few announcements. We've got an invite to Dawn Gardens in Grass Valley on November 18th to see the fall color. Barry Friesen is a lifetime Hort member, and he has this 8-acre garden, and he'll have a golf cart and a driver will be available for those who need aid in getting around, for those that can't walk through the garden as easily or get tired or whatever. So that is open. That'll be in the newsletter as well, and we'll send that out as a email. Grass Valley's, it takes about 3 hours. So it's a bit of a drive if you want to carpool. I think I'm going to be going. So if anybody wants to tag along with me, I'd be glad to have company. So anyway, that's coming up. Next meeting in November, we're going to have an in-person meeting, and it's going to be more of a social thing. We're going to have dinner and hopefully a walk through the garden at 4 or 4:30. But there'll be more details in the emails. And then we'll have dinners and sharing of sorts. I'm not sure if we're going to have, we might have a theme to that, like a plant forum one. And then plant exchange. So if anybody has extra little offspring that they want to bring in to share with other members, we'll be doing that as well. And I think we're going to have a couple of demonstration tables too, and you can paint rocks if you want for your gardener, planter, or whatever. Anyway, so it should be a fun evening, and I hope everybody can make it. It's at the County Fair building, and there's parking in the back, and you access that at on Lincoln, right past, if you're going from the bridge, right past 9th Street. So that is going to be next month. I think we're ready to see Gerhard. So Gerhard is, wonderful blog.
Succulents and more.
Most of you know Gerhard from his blog and all his great information that he gives. You do it at least weekly. Do you do it sometimes more than weekly?
Yeah, I try to do like 2 a week.
Okay. And does a lot of garden. He probably knows a lot of people going to all those gardens. It's a great gig he has, being able to interact with all these gardeners. And
I learn something from everybody. You know, it's what it's about, right? Seeing each other's garden, because everybody does something else.
Exactly. So, and it's not exact science. So everything, even if you do it differently, it may or may not be better or worse. So
my presentation is all about Mangaves, which I don't know how many of you have come across them, probably all of you by now. And another title, I call it what the, whatever are they? Another title could be Mangaves from collector item to marketing phenomenon, because there has been a tremendous sales push to get these plants into nurseries and as many gardens as possible. Or another title could be Mangaves inspired by nature, created by man, because except for 1 or 2 natural hybrids, all the Mangaves you see out there are created by humans. Now let's start with the basics. Mangaves are succulents, and they are hybrids between manfredas and agaves, and the two together become Mangave. Both are closely related genera in the asparagus family, and hybrids do occur in nature, but they're rare. Most of the Mangaves are man-made, as I said. I'll talk about the history of the Mangave in a minute. This is a good illustration of what they are. Manfreda plus agave makes Mangave. And a quick note on pronunciation. I've heard people say Mangave, which is not a man cave, kind of hurts. It's Mangave, man from Manfreda, and the agave part from agave. Now let's look quickly at the distribution. Agaves and manfredas grow in many of the same places. The range of agaves extends from the southern United States through Mexico all the way into northern South America. The range of manfredas extends from the southwestern and southern US to Mexico and Central America. Manfreda virginica down here, the one you see in the picture, actually even grows as far north as the Ozarks. And for both genera, the heaviest concentration is in Mexico. Most agaves and manfredas grow in climates with summer rain, and that means you can also water Mangaves generously in the summer to help them grow as quickly as possible. Now, agaves, you're all familiar with them. They are beautiful architectural plants, often with very fierce teeth and terminal spines. Generally, they're slow growing and have a lifespan from 20 to 30 years. There's even at least one species that nobody has ever seen in bloom. At the end of their life, agaves produce flower stalks that are sometimes almost comically large. Agave atrovirens, for example, can have a flower stalk that's 40 feet tall. I mean, wrap your head around that, 40 feet. And you can sort of see why all the energy, the plant puts all the energy it has left at the end of its lifespan into making this one flower stalk and the flowers, and then hopefully the flowers get pollinated and produce seeds. And after that, there's nothing left, and the plant dies. I think with the exception of maybe a couple or 3 agave species, they're all monocarpic, which means they die after flowering. Manfredas aren't as attractive. Typically, they have rubbery leaves with no teeth and very weak terminal spines, but most of them have purple pigments in the leaves, which is highly desirable for hybrids. Manfredas grow much, much faster and flower at an early age, often 2 or 3 years. In most species, the rosette dies, like with agaves, but it produces pups, so the cycle keeps going. Manfreda flowers look really alien. I mean, nobody would say these are beautiful flowers, but they're certainly very interesting flowers. They're loosely arranged on the flower stalk and have almost comically long stamens. Now let's take a look at how Mangaves came to be. What's unique is that with Mangaves, the history is actually well documented. So we know exactly how they came about and who created them. And that's really unique because, I mean, how many genera do you know where, where they came from? Most of them are natural. They just kind of evolved over time. But this is an artificial genus that was created by men. The phenomenon is the work of 3 men, really. Karl Schoenfeld on the left here. He was the owner of Yakadu Nursery when it was still in existence. Tony Avent is the owner of Plant Delights Nursery in North Carolina. And Hans Hansen up here, he's currently the director of new plant development at Walter's Gardens in Michigan. Now, the history began in 2003 when Karl Schoenfeld, who was the owner of Yakadu Nursery at the time, had just come back from a botanizing trip to northern Mexico, where he had collected seeds of what he thought was Manfreda variegata, the plant up here. After the seeds had germinated, he had hundreds of seedlings, but he noticed that 2 were much, much larger than the others. After checking with some friends, most notably Tony Avent, they decided that these seedlings, the ones that were larger, were most likely a natural hybrid between Manfreda variegata and an agave mitis that had been flowering nearby. And then Karl and Tony Avent named this new group of plants Mangave. And the Manfreda variegata plus agave mitis hybrid became Macho Mocha. Mm-hmm. Macho Mocha, which many of you I'm sure have seen, was sent to another plant guy, Hans Hansen, who at the time was running the tissue culture lab at Shady Oaks Hosta Nursery in Minnesota. He was able to tissue culture Macho Mocha, and it was introduced commercially in 2004 by both Yakadu and Plant Delights. And that was the very first Mangave that ever made it into the trade. At around the same time, a really striking plant up here from Japan was beginning to show up in specialty nurseries and plant shows and on eBay. It was initially called agave blood spot, but Tony Avent thought that it looked also like a cross between agave and Manfreda, most likely agave macrocantha and Manfreda maculata. So it was renamed Mangave blood spot, and to this day, the creator of blood spot, I should say, has never been identified, so it's an anonymous creation. But Bloodspot has gone on to become probably the most popular Mangave ever, and even to this day, it's grown. It's used as a parent for new hybrids, and some of you might have even had it or still have it in your garden. Tony Avent and Plant Delights Nursery, they were an early pioneer in creating new Mangaves, but they realized that they did not have the resources to propagate them on a commercial scale. So Tony Avent decided to turn the Mangave work that they had done over to Hans Hansen, who in the meantime had become director of new plant development at Walter's Gardens in Zeeland, Michigan. And Walter's Gardens is one of the country's largest wholesale grower of plants, perennials, Hans was able to keep his collection in one of the greenhouses at Walter's Gardens, although initially the company didn't have really any interest in them. But Hans continued to make more hybrids as a sideline. And then right in the 2010s, early 2010s, the popularity of succulents exploded, especially softleaf succulents, like the ones made popular by Deborah Lee Baldwin. And it also coincided with really the advent of social media. So a lot of plants became popular very quickly. And in 2014, the marketing team at Walter's Gardens decided that, well, maybe these plants, are actually commercially viable. So 2 years later, in 2016, they released the first two of Hans's creations, Pineapple Express on the left, and then Moonglow over here. And a year later, in 2017, 7 more Mangaves were released, all the ones you see up here. And the fact that most of these initial introductions are still being sold now speaks to their popularity and how special they were from the beginning. Sales at Walter's Gardens exceeded all expectations, so they decided to invest serious marketing money in introducing Mangaves to a wider audience. They launched the Mad About Mangave campaign, complete with posters, that nurseries were able to use at their point of sale, and plant tags, really beautiful plant tags with pretty pictures. And this opened the floodgates. And then since then, new Mangaves have come out every year. Here you see the 2023 lineup of Mangaves sold by Walter's Gardens. The first two are Manfreda undulata selections with the crispy wavy leaves and pretty colors, and the others are Mangaves. And you can see there's a huge variety, both in terms of sizes, leaf colors, growth habits. Some Mangaves are they look more like manfredas, the ones with rubbery leaves. Others look much more like Mangaves with stiff leaves, sometimes with teeth and spines. The initial batch of Mangaves was pretty much 50-50, 50% manfreda, 50% agave. But over time, these initial introductions have been crossed and back crossed, and now you can have some that look almost entirely like agaves, others look more like manfredas. Walter's Gardens has an extensive pollen library now, so they can really hybridize for the traits they want. And I didn't know that frozen pollen has a long life, especially when stored in a commercial freezer. Even pollens frozen for 10 years can still be viable. In addition to general appearance,
Really?
fast
God.
growth and easy cultivation, Walter's Gardens is also breeding for cold hardiness. That's really not an issue for we live, but much of the country is in zone 7 and below, and they have real winters where tender plants don't survive. In the Midwest and on the East Coast, I've been told that many people treat Mangaves as annuals. So they buy them in the spring, grow them on, and then in the fall, they toss them because they don't have room to bring them inside. By using cold-tolerant agave species like Montana, Perry and Availablity, the cold hardiness of Mangaves has been improved down to zone 7, which, isn't all that cold, but certainly much colder than what we have. Now, with the exception of Matcha Mocha and Blood Spots, most agaves you see in nurseries come from Walter's Gardens, but others have started to make Mangaves too. This includes Altman Plants, one of the largest plant producers in the country, as well as a number of backyard growers and hobbyists. If you've been to Home Depot or Lowe's and you see the little succulents that are usually near the entrance, they all come from Altman Plants in San Diego. They are currently the #2 plant grower in the US by greenhouse space. And they released one agave a couple of years ago called Barney. This here, I think it looks a little bit generic, but in full sun, it does turn almost entirely purple. This is their second introduction called Tequila Fire. And you may see this pop up at Home Depot and Lowe's and the big box store garden centers. Brian Campbell, which most of you, I'm sure, know, is the curator at the Ruth Bancroft Garden in Walnut Creek. And he's created several striking Mangaves, which you can really only see at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. Like this one, Purple Ribbons, it's a cross between Matcha Mocha and Agave pablocarioi. That's a species that was previously known as Agave gypsophylla. Here it is growing by the pond at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. But since I took this picture 3 years ago, it's flowered and died. But I'm hoping Brian has more. This is a more recent one called Blue Fountain, a cross between Agave parasana and a manfreda hybrid that he created. There's a whole bunch of these planted out in the garden. Some of them have flowered now and are dying, but apparently it's in tissue culture, so it might soon become available at the Ruth Bancroft Garden, probably. There's also backyard growers and small, people who sell plants. Steve Super, for example, he has a small nursery in Los Osos on the Central Coast. He's been creating a number of cool mangaves that look quite different from what Walter's Gardens has produced. I have not seen any of these in person. These are pictures taken from his Instagram account, but he told me that some of them will soon become available on his website, stevesupergardens.com, and on his Etsy account. Nick Deinhardt is also, you may have heard of him in conjunction with aloes. He's a pretty well-known aloe hybridizer, but he started to create mangaves as well. And I actually have this one, the one on the left in my garden. It's a cross between Titanota and Bloodspot. And a friend of mine, who's just like a regular guy, he had an Agave parasana and a Mangave silver fox flowering in his garden at the same time. So he just transferred pollen from the parasana to the silver fox, got lots of seeds, and he has 30, 40 seedlings, and they show a wide variation of traits from both parents. So it's not difficult to do. In fact, now I'm going to show you how it's done. Mangaves are created the same way any hybrid is, by transferring pollen from, parent A to parent B. In nature, it's done by pollinators, but to make intentional crosses, tools like paintbrushes or even makeup applicators are used. Some people simply cut off the flower with the pollen and take it straight to the receiving flower and transfer the stigma that way. I want to show you a short video from a volunteer at Juniper Level Botanical Garden in North Carolina, transferring pollen from Agave bracteosa to a very large flowering Mangave blue mammoth. It's actually quite a comical undertaking because the plant is so tall. Let's hope this will play. I'm not going to play the whole video, just so you get an idea. I am a volunteer here at Juniper Level Botanic Gardens. What we're doing right now, we're working on this plant here, which is Mangave blue mammoth. And what we're trying to do is see if we can get it to hybridize with some of the other agaves that are on the site. So the first one, though, we've already done a number. You can see, looking at this plant, there are a number of tags on it. And each branch there, we've selected and taken and put a different pollen from a different agave on it. Today, we're going to be trying to put some pollen from Agave bracteosa on this plant. So let me show you a little bit of what's going on. We've made the tags so that we actually know what's going on. Since we're doing this main stem, what we're going to do here is I'm going to take a few of these pods off. Just get rid of them, because what I don't want is any confusion about which pollen I'm using. So since I've got other pollen here, I want to make sure I'm not using anything else. And these have already self-pollinated, so I don't want those. So I just want this upper part that I can put this new pollen on. So I'll have a tag that you have. This is the tag for Mangave blue mammoth, and we're crossing it with Agave bracteosa.
So let's see. So we have two parts of this flower here. You can see we have the anthers here, which have the pollen attached to it. So we'll remove that. A lot of times we collect that too. And then we bring the pollen from our other agave and actually touch it onto this stigma there. And you can see the stigma is nice and moist, and it's actually sticky so that it's ready to accept pollen. Okay, so this is our Bracteosa pollen.
And that's a lot of pollen.
We're up here working with the bees because the bees, this plant has got a lot of its pollen out there now, and the bees sort of love this. They're doing something, and they may be actually helping to cross-pollinate it or do something else. So we're always aware of the fact, since this is an open environment, that things can be pollinated by bees rather than by us. But usually if we can get the pollen on just at the right time, it won't accept any other pollen. This plant itself, this blue mammoth from last year's work, does very good at accepting pollens from other agaves. So we'll hit it today. We'll come back and repollinate it on Thursday. And then if it still looks like it's able to accept pollen, we'll hit it again next week.
Well, you get the idea. And you know, you wait then to see if the pollen, the hybridization has taken, and then you get seeds, and then you grow the seedlings on to see what they look like. And if you're lucky, you find a hybrid that looks great. And then you have exactly what you want, but how are you going to propagate it on a large scale? And you could wait until the hybrid offsets, but that takes time. And then you may have 5 plants, and then you got to wait until you grow up and produce offsets, and it would just take forever. The most efficient way is to propagate your Mangave hybrid through tissue culture. Like I'd say most perennials that you buy in garden centers and in nurseries, they're all propagated through tissue culture. And you know, you hear the word a lot, tissue culture, micro propagation, but frankly, I personally didn't have a good idea of how it's done. And I found a short video where the director of the tissue culture lab at Walter's Gardens gives a tour and explains the basic. It's not a long video, and the audio isn't that great, but I wanted to show you. So you have an idea of how tissue culture is done, not specifically for Mangaves, but in general.
Hi, my name is Kelly Oates. I'm the director of our tissue culture lab here at Walter's Gardens. Many people probably don't realize that we have a lab, but we've actually been open since 1976. Walter's Gardens was a pioneer of tissue culture back in the 70s. There really weren't many commercial tissue culture facilities around, especially not in nurseries. When we started, we were primarily producing creeping phlox and having nematode-free stock for our fields. Now we produce over 750,000 units a year of many different varieties. We also maintain disease-free, virus-free clean stock, as well as having many other research and development functions. Before we get too far, I should probably explain more of what tissue culture is. Tissue culture is a method of propagating plants in a laboratory setting under sterile conditions. Primarily, we're talking about micropropagation or cloning. This allows us to go from one plant to many thousands, often very quickly. Cloning sounds like a scary science term, but what we actually do is very similar to taking cuttings or divisions in the greenhouse, which is also considered cloning. To get a variety started in the lab, we will select a healthy mother plant and usually take stem or basal cuttings. We whittle these down to get close to the bud or meristem. and then bring them under the laminar flow hood for sterilization. The buds or stem cuttings are placed in a bleach solution and spun for 10 to 20 minutes. This sterilizes the tissue and allows us to propagate using clean tissue. This is a rather harsh process for a plant, as you can imagine, and so it can often take 2 to 8 weeks for the plant to really recover and start growing again. Once it does, we work to clone that original plant by taking micro cuttings or micro divisions. This work is also done under the laminar flow hood to ensure a sterile environment. Whether we are establishing a new plant or trying to meet an order for the greenhouse, we typically process the same batch of plants every 4 to 6 weeks, taking more micro cuttings or divisions each time. Some varieties do very well, and we can get more than 10 from one each time we process. You can imagine this allows us to build our stock very quickly. To achieve all of this, the plants are grown on specialized media that includes all the nutrients required for growth, as well as hormones that encourage either multiplication or rooting. The media is a gel which has a consistency of jello. The gel agent we use is a auger, which is actually harvested from seaweed and used in many food products, which is kind of a fun fact. The final stage of our production process is to put roots on the plantlets and send them out to the greenhouse to be planted. There, they will typically be grown out and eventually sent out to our customers or be planted in our fields. The lab also keeps clean stock for our production and R&D items.
That's really all I wanted to show you. Let me go back to my presentation now. So once these plantlets are a certain size, they're sold to wholesale growers either as stage 3 liners, which are really, really tiny plants, or as stage 4 liners. They're a little bigger. They come like 72 to a tray. And then wholesale growers take good care of them, water them, fertilize them, and they grow them on until they're maybe 3-inch or 4-inch pots, which then get sold to retail nurseries. And that's, where you would buy them. Once you have your own mangaves, it's very easy to propagate them because many of them make pups or offsets like you see in these. And all you do is you just carefully, pry them off. Most of the time they don't have roots on their own, but you stick it in like pumice or a well-draining succulent mix, and they will root quickly as long as it's hot. So you want to do this, let's say late spring to fall. You wouldn't want to do it now because it's just simply not warm enough anymore unless you do it inside on a heat mat and, with lights to stimulate growth. Mangaves, unlike other collector plants that are always stay collector items, Mangaves became, mainstream because they were made by the thousands. And this is a picture I found on the internet, a Mad About Mangave truck delivering Mangaves to wherever. I mentioned earlier, in colder climates, they're sold as annuals. This is a picture a friend of mine in Portland sent me, and they are literally sold as annuals there, and now in the fall discounted as annuals. This is a plant that I would put in my garden and it would happily grow there year round. Same for you. But in colder climates, they would die. It's just a different mindset to me. I mean, to spend $17 on what is essentially an annual, that seems outrageous to me. But maybe in other parts of the country, people actually do have a budget for annuals, and they spend a good amount of money on annuals every year. Much of the credit of the popularities goes to social media because when Mangaves first came into being, this coincided with the emergence of Instagram and Facebook or TikTok or whatever, and influencers, once they latch onto a plant, they promote the hell out of it. This guy here is his name is Michael Perry. He also goes by Mr. Plant Geek. He's one of the leading social media influencers from the UK, and he tirelessly posts pictures of himself surrounded by plants, like here, surrounded by all kinds of Mangaves. He seems to love Mangaves more than other plants because he got this massive back tattoo featuring 5 Mangaves. And that is, maybe Walter's Gardens paid him to do that. I don't know. But that pretty much, that shows dedication that I personally don't have. But now let's take a quick look before I show you, some individual Mangaves and how they're used in gardens. A quick overview of what makes them special or why they're being pushed on, for gardeners to put in their own gardens. they are fast growing. They grow quickly, especially the softer varieties. And they can be used similar to, you would use agaves, but they grow to a good size much, much faster. And in fact, in the summer, their main growing season, you can water them as much as you want to get them to grow quicker, but you can also water them less so they would grow slower. That, you know, many succulents, people don't really realize many succulents are very opportunistic. You give them water, they happily take the water, or you don't give them water, then, you know, they make do with that. Mangaves come in different forms and sizes, from vase-shaped plants with arching leaves, which are great for like a tall urn, or to perfectly symmetrical rosettes, like the prettiest agaves. And you can pick Mangaves with a mature size ranging from anywhere from 1 foot to 4 feet. So no matter how much or how little space you have in your garden, you're going to find something. The leaves can be all kinds of different colors, like green, yellow, pink, red, purple, depending on the genetics and also the amount of UV radiation. As a rule of thumb, the more UV, i.e. the more strong sunlight, the more colorful the leaves get. Mangaves are easy to handle. Most of them have soft spines and leaves with no teeth and no terminal spines, so no poking. You know, a lot of people like to look at Mangaves at agaves from a distance, but they would never have one in their garden because they're so pokey. Mangaves can give you most of the same look in a more user-friendly package. That means they can be planted along walkways or, you know, closer to areas where pets or children are. You know, I think that's a real benefit for people who have to take that into consideration. Hans Hansen, the mad genius at Walter's Gardens behind most of the commercially available Mangaves, said, "Mangaves do for the sun garden what hostas do for the shade garden." And he knows what he says, because he's also one of the best known hosta hybridizers in the world, having introduced over 60 different hostas. And another thing about hostas, I don't know that you knew, I didn't really know. Hostas are in the same family as manfredas and agaves, in the asparagus family. Tony Avon at Plant Delight's nursery actually has created hybrids between hostas and agaves called hostaves. But unfortunately, the results were not impressive, so they were never, you know, made available commercially. They simply looked like hostas with thicker leaves. It's still, you know, it's just a fun fact. Now let's take a closer look at the most beautiful and most widely available Mangaves. I recently read that now there are over 100 named varieties. And I think we're only at the beginning of the evolution, and we'll see lots of cool things being introduced in the years to come. I wouldn't be surprised if they develop Mangaves that actually do well inside. So, you know, people who live in cold climates or who only have an apartment, they can grow them on a sunny windowsill. I think that would be a breakthrough, because the houseplant crowd could get on board and houseplant influencers could take pictures of Mangaves. Let's start with some of the largest Mangaves. This is Mission to Mars. It's probably the best known large variety. It does need plenty of room to look its best. These 3 specimens at the Ruth Bancroft Garden are the best looking I've seen. Unfortunately, they bloomed and died last year, but they produced offsets, so the offsets can be replanted elsewhere and you can start all over.
What was the name of that one again?
Mission to Mars.
Thanks.
Many of them have really clever names. The next one is Aztec King. It's a hybrid with agave ovatifolia, which is a large agave, but it is wider than tall. Here's another image from the demonstration garden at Walter's Gardens. And it looks its best when it's raised up a little bit. Fiercely Fabulous is one of the newest introductions. It gets to about 2 feet wide. It's a chunkier, more solid looking plant, but in the full sun, it gets this beautiful shade of pinkish purple, And at bottom right, you see the same plant in more shade. And there it's just green with green spots, but in full sun, it can look like that. Iron Man is one of my favorites, but it's this is probably one of the most agave-like hybrids because the leaves are stiff. There's teeth along the margins, and it has a terminal spine. So you wouldn't want to plant it near walkways, but I like this kind of architectural look, and you plant it where you don't really come in contact with it that often. It's perfectly fine. This is permanent, a new one called Permanent Wave. It's a hybrid, an agave vatifolia hybrid, but it's supposed to grow much, much faster than its parent and eventually get to 3 feet in width. This is agave vatifolia, the agave parent. And as you can see, there's a very similar look, but this probably grows 2 or 3 times as fast. So you can have an architectural look in a much faster time period. Let's go on. This is, the agaves I just showed you are large. This is the other end of the spectrum. It's one of the smallest ones. It's really only just a little over a foot in diameter, but it forms a perfectly symmetrical rosette. This is the plant in my garden, and I'm actually really fond of it. Unfortunately, it's now flowering, sending up a pretty tall flower stalk. And it was it was entirely solitary until it started to flower. But now it has produced pups. So when the mother rosette dies, I have actually enough plants to start over and give some away. This is Bad Hair Day. It's been a very popular one. It's small, but it's almost like it's made for a face planter like these. And now, as of this year, there's a variegated variety, has like white stripes along the margins. This is called Black Magic. In the last few years, the focus has been on making mangaves that are really, really dark. So this is a dark purple in full sun. The more sun you give it, the darker the color becomes. This is another super dark one called Night Owl. This is the plant in my garden. This was a plant in a pot at Peacock Horticultural Nursery. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Peacock, maybe all of you, but Peacock Horticultural Nursery, they have the best selection of mangaves in Northern California, pretty much a complete selection. And if you've never been, really do yourself the favor and go. It's a fabulous nursery. It's not big, but it's just full of super cool plants. The Black Magic and Night Owl that you just saw, they turn a dark purple in full sun. This one called Red Wing turns like a rich red almost. So you have, whatever color you want, almost you can have. This is called Mayan Queen. It turns purple, a nice purple too, with pronounced spots, and a really beautiful growth habit, actually. It looks like an agave, but it grows much faster than an agave would. This is one called Desert Dragon. It's only 6 inches tall and maybe, foot 15 inches wide. It hugs the ground, but it seems like it has teeth, but they're really harmless. You can't even feel them. So this would be a good plant to plant next to a walkway. Inkblot was one of the first to be introduced, and it's also a very soft-leafed plant that's completely harmless. Looks great in a pot, or again, where people or pets might come into contact with it. Frosted Elegance is completely different. It has more rigid leaves like an agave would, but it has like this almost unearthly blue color with a fainter central stripe. And then at certain times of year, the leaf margins take on this purplish hue. I think this is just a really unique plant. Kaleidoscope is one of the most colorful varieties, especially in full sunlight. This is the clump this clump is in my front yard in a spot that bakes in the sun. And in Davis, you know, we have many days over 100 degrees, so it gets unbearably hot, and yet this plant just loves it. I had it in 2 other spots in the garden in more shade, and it just really didn't like it. So it wants this kind of heat. Unfortunately, for some reason, Kaleidoscope has never been in tissue culture. They somehow cannot tissue culture it. And that's why it's never been widely available, because it really can only be propagated through offsets. Here it is combined with you know, more traditional bedding flowers. So it goes to show that, you know, it can really fit into a garden that is actually not a succulent garden or desert garden at all, but it still looks like a great statement plant. Now, Kaleidoscope, as I said, cannot be tissue cultured, but there's a new one now, this one called Pineapple Punch, that has pretty much the same color scheme. And this one is in tissue culture, and it's now widely available. It's a variegated sport of Pineapple Express, which is all green. It's, I think, a really pretty plant because the leaves, you know, they arch, they up and then slightly over. And in full sun, it actually does look like this. And this is a Pineapple Punch in my garden in maybe half sun, half shade. And as you can see, it's much, much greener, still very pretty, but it looks totally different. And that's what this is what full sun will do. Maybe in San Francisco, that your sun is never hot enough to produce richer colors, so your plant might always look like that, but you know, it's still a pretty plant. This is the Pineapple Express, the all green version, which, you know, is it doesn't shout like, you know, wow, I'm the super plant, but it's still a cool plant for the garden. Mangave Purple People Eater it's my favorite plant name, and it's actually stiff, so much more like an agave, and maybe that's why they call it Purple People Eater, because, you know, you touch it and you go ouch. The same goes for Tooth Fairy. You know, it's also an ouchy plant, so if you don't like pokey plants, not for you. Still, it's a great looking plant. Racing Stripes comes from Agave lophantha. If you've ever seen Agave lophantha, it has that central stripe. So it's, you know, similar to these. They are like purple, sometimes with a stripe. This is green with a stripe. Whatever color you want, you know, it's out there. And just 2 more to go through. This is Lavender Lady. Was one of the first to be introduced, but it probably is the most popular Mangave to date because it has this, I mean, beautiful symmetrical form. The leaves are completely unarmed, so very user-friendly. And even people who don't like succulents, you know, they see this, it's like, wow, I gotta have one. This is at the Ruth Bancroft Garden paired with Senecio mandriliscae with its sort of icy blue. Here's Lavender Lady in a private garden in the Oakland Hills. Here's Lavender Lady in a pot. As you can see, I like Lavender Lady. I could show you a lot more pictures, but you get the idea. Now, this one is the most unique Mangave to date, called Praying Hands. And it's finally becoming more available. It's a hybrid with an agave called Okahui, which I will show you in a second, but it formed, I mean, the leaves really do look like that. My oldest plant now is that size, and it looks just like this ball. It's just unlike anything else. I mean, I saw this for the first time. I mean, it was years ago before it came available, and it's like, wow, I gotta have that. This is the agave parent. So it does look a little bit similar, but the leaves are a lot more narrow and they don't quite fold up like this. Now, the ones I showed you are the ones that are available, but with anything, there's always something new on the horizon. And Hans Hansen at Walter's Gardens, he regularly posts of Mangaves in development that might soon make it onto the market. to tease us, you know, like, look at this. This is called Bridal Falls. It's not available yet. But man, you know, if you have a tall container and plant this, and so it can like spill out over the container, I think it would make a great statement. This is called Foxy Lady. It's a sport of an existing one called Silver Fox. But Foxy Lady turns this, I mean, purple leaves with pink margins in full sun. It's just spectacular. This is called Frosted Jade. It's a variegated form of Frosted Elegance, which you saw earlier. I mean, of course, I love agaves, but this is a plant I would just love to have. This is called Inky Fingers. It's a sport of ink plot. Again, a look unlike anything else. This is Life on Mars, a variegated sport of Mission on Mars. The first one, the first Mangave I showed you. The colors are it's much more colorful. This is Queen for a Day. It's a sport of an existing one called Mayan Queen, where Mayan Queen is all purple, but in this, the purple pigments have all migrated to the leaf margins, leaving this sort of cream de mint colored stripe in the middle. It's I have one, and it looks exactly like that. Wave Crest, another ground hugging one with variegated leaves. And the last one I'll show you is called Wingman. It's a variegated sport of red wing. It's one of the most colorful mangaves I've seen. In fact, this might be one of the most colorful plants I've ever seen. You know, so many colors in one leaf. And this is in tissue culture now. It should be available in a couple of years. I hope I haven't like bored you to death yet, but now I'm going to show you mangaves in garden settings, you know, in public gardens and some private gardens, so you can see how they actually fit into planting schemes. This is more of a desert garden. It's the newly created bed in the desert display garden at the Los Angeles County Arboretum. It's the most extensive planting of mangaves I've seen, and mixed in with the mangaves are some agaves, variegated and non-variegated agaves. I think this is the kind of look that I love because it's water wise. You know, it grows well with rocks, but you may not have the heat required for them to be this colorful. These are a couple of lavender ladies at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. I think this one I already showed you, the one on the right. The one on the left is has monkey flowers on top. So, you know, it fits into any planting scheme. This is Navajo Princess at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. Again, a soft leaf plant that goes with a lot of different other plants. These are a few potted mangaves at Peacock Horticultural Nursery. This is Silver Fox paired with an Oscularia deltoides in a pot. This is Night Owl paired with another Oscularia and a Crassula. They make really outstanding plants, and they are, you know, they're the thriller in the thriller fillers. What's it called? Thriller spiller filler scheme. This is one called Whale's Tail at a friend's house in Sacramento. Perfect for a tall urn, you know, just makes a statement and needs little water, loves the sun, always looks good. The friend of mine whose garden this is, he's a geologist by trade, and he has a large collection of rocks, and he's been working them into his garden beds. And they combine well with succulents, and this is like a, what is it, a lamb's ear maybe? This is a mangave called Man of Steel with, I have no idea what this rock is, but I saw it and I wanted it. This is another friend of mine. He's created these wonderful miniature landscapes with lava rock that raised up on the ground, and he, you know, makes little planting beds that he then fills with. This is a mangave, a cactus, an echeveria, an aloe, surrounded by California poppies. This is at a friend's house in San Diego. He pairs, this is a mangave in the front, pairs it with agaves, aloes, lomandras, and even a leucodendron there in the back. all plants that, you know, have similar water requirements. The award for the most inventive use of Mangaves goes to Troy McGregor. I think all of you know him. He planted Mangave redwing there on the bottom right, and lots of other succulents on the top of his chicken coop. So this is actually a chicken coop. This picture I took in Carmel, and it was like I did a double take. It was like a pretty uniform sea of, you know, green aeoniums with this one Mangave kaleidoscope in the middle, just like shouting out, you know, like, wow, this is a picture that I almost want to hang on my wall. This is a garden I visited this year as part of the Ruth Bancroft Garden in the Contra Costa County Water District. Did a sort of a open garden. This is a fairly traditional garden in Walnut Creek with lots of flowering annuals and perennials. And the owner told me that she doesn't really care for succulents, but she saw Mission to Mars at the Ruth Bancroft Garden, and she decided she had to have some. So, you know, here they are, surrounded by flowering poppies and monkey flowers and what have you, looking like, you know, a statement plant. This is one of my favorite vignettes involving Mangaves. No loud colors, so pretty much blues and greens, but a beautiful pairing of contrasting textures. You know, Mangave crazy cowlicks surrounded by ferns and lomandras and carex. This is in my friend Max's garden in Oakland. He's a horticulturist by trade, so, you know, he knows what he's doing. This is the garden of Mark Ramirez in Oakland, which I think some of you might have been to. He has colorful, I mean, it's the most colorful garden I've seen, bromeliads and echeverias and soft-leaf succulents. And also on the right, here's a Mangave Pineapple Express, you know, pairing beautifully with this outrageously colored Bilbergia. This was one of my favorite gardens, a personal garden of landscape designer Matt McGrath in the Berkeley Hills. He has since moved to Rodeo and has a completely new garden, but I have fond memories of his old gardens because it had everything from bamboos to leucadendrons and bananas and tropicals. And he also worked Mangaves into his planting schemes, redwing on the left, kaleidoscope top right, and lavender lady bottom right. Here's a few more from his old garden. This is actually manfreda cherry chocolate chip, the bottom on the left. The plant on the right is an aloe, and it mirrors the form of the manfreda almost perfectly. The top right is one called Bloodlines, you know, seamlessly integrated into a sea of sedums, echeverias, and a whole lot of other soft-leaf succulents. As I said, Matt has moved to a new garden, a spectacular new garden in Rodeo, which he and his wife created in just 2 years. And again, there's lots of Mangaves growing in the middle of these tapestries of soft-leaf succulents, as well as in pots. They have a lot of pots too. This is Inky Fingers that I showed you earlier, paired with Sedum Angelina. And a few more. This is a Mangave combined with, this is an Acmea, I think, and there's a California fuchsia, Van Aloe, Restios in the back. I mean, it's a total, you know, fusion garden in the best way possible. Matt also sent me some pictures of gardens he created for clients where he incorporated Mangaves. So here you see on the right, you see Mangave, and there's aeoniums of different colors, alstromerias, yuccas, cordylines, even all over here on the left, columnar euphorbia. And another garden that was done by Troy McGregor. It's a sort of a minimalistic garden, just flagstone, pebbles, a rock fountain, and a minimalistic planting scheme with Mangave redwing and Lomandra platinum beauty. is an example that Mangaves also work well for rather utilitarian plantings. This is a selection of Mangaves a friend of mine planted in the parking lot of her condo complex. The strip isn't technically hers because it's in the shared parking lot, and there was nothing in it, just like dirt. And she asked the HOA, and they agreed that she could take over, take care of it and plant whatever she wants. And these Mangaves don't need much water, and they look good year round. Finally, a few photos from Facebook where people do all kinds of creative things. I'm not a big fan of cutesy whimsy, but I actually really like these face planters with Mangave Bad Hair Day. On the right is a purple people eater next to a flowering sedum. Beautiful color contrast. This is a picture I found recently, kaleidoscope, Mangave kaleidoscope paired with pumpkins. Here's one in a sort of a cottage garden in a sort of formal urn raised up on a pedestal, looking great, surrounded by irises, roses, and whatever. On the right, you have a Mangave in the snow with Christmas balls. And Mangaves, of course, are also perfect for container gardening. Some people don't have a lot of space. They just have a patio or a balcony. And you can have a whole collection of Mangaves in pots, as you can see here. This is another guy on Instagram. He's an enthusiastic Mangave collector, and I think all of his are planted in pots. And I could go on and on, but I just want to tell you that cats like Mangaves too. They're cool, and I think everybody should have some. Now I know I'm already over time, but a few notes on cultivation. Based on my experience in Davis, in our climate, they're really easy to grow. All of the ones I've shown you are hardy in zone 9, which I'm in zone 9, you're probably in zone 10. A half a day of full sun is needed for best color and most intense spotting. But if you're okay with a look that's more green, that's, more shade is fine too. During this growing season in summer, when they're in full growth mode, I think it's almost impossible to overwater them. The more water you give them, the faster they grow. Fertilize lightly, they say. I'm sort of the guy who, when I plant something, I throw a little bit of fertilizer in there. But after that, they're on their own. Now, this is a question that I always get asked: are Mangaves deciduous? Some Mangaves are deciduous, especially the ones that have that are more manfreda-like. So in the winter, they may end up like this. This is a plant in my garden. And the first time I thought this, oh my God, I thought it's frost damage or whatever. It's just hideous. It's done. It's never going to come back. I dig it up. But some Mangaves actually go dormant, and the leaves will just die completely. They will go away completely. And in the spring, they come back magically. So for me, I want plants that look good year round. So this is not actually something I want to deal with, because I don't want a dead plant or an ugly plant. Even if it comes back in the spring, it looks great again. But if you have a Mangave like that, one with soft leaves and stuff, and it ends up looking like this in the winter, it's nothing you did wrong. It's just going deciduous. Although that's more a thing in colder climates, where we may never experience this. This is the question I get asked all the time. Will they die after flowering? Mm-hmm. As you remember, most agaves do die after flowering, and most manfredas also die after flowering. And you find all kinds of information nobody really knows, or some people have very firm opinions. In my experience, the plant, the rosette that flowers, will die. But many of them, even the solitary ones, will form offsets either just before they flower, or after they're done flowering and the rosette is dried up, and you remove it and it's like, oh, there's pups underneath. There's even some Mangaves that form bulbils, miniature plants on the flower stalk. And if you have a clump of a variety that clumps heavily, like Pineapple Express or Kaleidoscope, you may at any given time have, 10 or 20 individual plants, and then one of them flowers and dies. You may not even notice it because the neighboring plants just grow bigger and they kind of just take over, where the flowering and dead plant was. Just a quick note on pests. For me, mealybugs are the biggest pests, not just on Mangaves, on echeverias, on God knows on what. I can't grow sempervivums in my garden because they go dormant in the summer, and then the mealybugs came in, and literally I've seen them kill a plant in 2 or 3 days because they just like explode. So I'm always aware of mealybugs, and if there's just a few, you can hose them off with a strong spray of water. If you have more, spray them with isopropyl alcohol, insecticidal soap, neem oil, or if you must, insecticide. And then after a week or so, you can hose off the dead cocoons with a strong spray of water. This may or may not take care of the infestation. If it was a pretty strong infestation, you may have to repeat this a few times, but just be observant. And systemic insecticides, they're probably the quickest and best way to fix the problem, but there are so many issues with systemic insecticides and bees and flowering plants. So really only do it if you really have to. There's only really one pest, and that's the agave snout weevil, which until last year, I would have said is only an issue in Arizona, maybe Southern California. This is this kind of really hideous looking thing. The weevil pierces the core of the plant and then lays eggs, and the grubs hatch and they consume the plant from the inside out, which then literally just like collapses. And this was not an issue, as I said here, but a friend of mine in garden lost several agaves, Agave americanus, to the snout weevil recently. I was skeptical, but then I heard it from another gardener who lost agaves to the weevil, and UC Davis came out. They took samples, and they said it is indeed that. And UC Davis is taking it very seriously because agaves are being grown commercially in our area for the production of agave spirits. They can't call it tequila because only tequila coming from agave tequilana grown in the state of Jalisco can be called tequila. But it's actually, you see it more and more. They make agave spirits from agaves grown in our area. And so you have these massive fields of agaves. And imagine if you have a pest like this that can, eradicate all the agaves in a field, that would have a huge commercial impact. So they're taking it seriously. If you happen to have the snout weevil, which I don't think any of you will ever have it, but all you can do is remove the dead plant, drench the soil with pesticide, and not plant a susceptible plant there for a while. Or if you're worried about it and want to prevent it, then the only thing you can do is plant systemic insecticide. Again, this is probably nothing that will ever affect you, but I didn't think it would affect us, but it might. And then the next question, the biggest question always is, will they die after flowering? And then is, where can I find them? Local nurseries usually have a few. So if you've been to nurseries, you've probably seen them, but they may only be 2, 3, or 4 different varieties. Peacock Horticultural Nursery in Sebastopol, they have a huge selection. They probably have 20 or 30 varieties. And, as well as all kinds of other cool plants from bromeliads, ferns, conifers, ginkgos. The nursery is run by Robert Peacock, who is like a consummate plantsman. And I don't think there's a plant that he doesn't like. And, it's his nursery, so he can carry whatever he wants. If you want to go mail order, Plant-A-Light's nursery, plantalights.com, they have a large selection of mangaves. Mountain Crest Garden is another mail order company that I can actually recommend. I've ordered from them before. They have a pretty good selection, but their plants are really small, so you can get like plugs in 2-inch pots. But they do grow fast, so if you want to start out that way, they're not expensive. That is certainly an alternative. Or if you're adventurous and buy plants on eBay, on Etsy, you're going to find them there. But for me, and maybe for you, the best source is the UC Davis Arboretum plant sales. The next one is actually this coming Saturday, October 21st, and then another one on October 4th. You can go to their website. They have a complete inventory of all the plants that will be in the sale. And this, I haven't seen the inventory for the coming sale, but this was the inventory for the first sale a couple of weeks ago. And they had all these manfredas and mangaves available in 3-inch pots, but the plants were like really big. They were probably big enough to be put in a gallon size, and they're $7.50 each, and Arboretum members get a $10 discount. So if you want to make the drive to Davis, it's only an hour. It's a wonderful way not to just get mangaves, but they had 33,000 plants in the sale, in the September 30th sale, and there were like 600 different taxa. And I'm a bit partial because I'm a volunteer at the nursery. I work there every Thursday morning, putting up plants for the sales. So I see what's there. And it's an exciting place to work because the nursery manager, Taylor, he's trying to have plants that, commercial nurseries don't necessarily have, water-wise plants from the Southwest and Australian plants and what have you. So if you want to make the drive, I can highly recommend it. A few more resources if you want to find out more. You just do a Google search, but these websites have more in-depth information. Succulents and More is my blog. I've blogged since 2010, I think, so 13 years. There are over 2,000 posts with tens of thousands of photos there. And I've been trialing Mangaves for Walter's Gardens for about 5 years, which means at random intervals, they sent me a box and I don't know what's in it. And then it's usually some new Mangaves, and it's like I grow them in my garden and I tell them how they do, or how I like them, or how easy or how fast how slow they grow. That's really why I have so much experience with them. If you have any questions, you can email me. There's my email address, anytime. You find me on Instagram as well at Succulents and More. If you have any questions now, just put them in the chat, which I think some of you already have done.
I saw one that Mark talked about monocarpic, if you could prevent that.
No, it's a lot of people have tried. It's like when they see the flower stalk emerging, they cut it off. But it's like it's almost like a one-way street. Once that has been set in motion, there's no way to stop it. You can cut off the flower stalk, but the plant will still die.
That's fine. I have a manfreda and it comes back and it blooms every year.
Yeah.
But it might be, for all I know, it might be just running around in the pot and kind of dying back and a new one coming.
That's exactly what I think. The flowering one will die, but the other ones grow so quickly they kind of just push,
right.
Take up the space that was, where the flowering one was.
So
it
they're
seems
probably
like they never die.
Yeah, they're monocarpic too, then. Huh?
But they also offset like crazy, so you always have plants.
Are there any of them whose flowers you especially admire? I was taken by Navajo Princess when I saw it at up in Petaluma, the Mustang Ranch Garden. I'm blanking on her name now, but fantastic garden, of course. And but it's amazing. I mean, it's like a huge totem club of a flower head.
It's like on certain varieties, the flower stalk actually looks like a giant asparagus, and the flowers can be red or yellow. And I mean, I think they're cool flowers. They're not traditionally beautiful flowers, but the flower stalk, you see one of those flower stalks, it's like, wow, that's impressive.
Gerhard, I had a blood spot.
Yeah.
And it bloomed and created a lot of pups, but every pup also bloom at the same time.
Yeah, that happens with agave
crazy.
Too sometimes. It's not typical. That's not typical, but it can happen, and people theorize that it's the hormones that trigger flowering in the mother plant.
Oh.
They just spill over into the pups as well, and then these tiny immature plants, they send up the flower stalks is really short, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
Tiny little flower stalks. It's a weird look, but it does happen. It's not typical, but it can in both mangaves and agaves.
do the baby pup again then?
I did. I have some.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're gonna have some. And you know, when you have a tangle of pups, it's not a look I like, but you can easily take a pot apart and then, you know, maybe end up with 10 or 20, and you know, you keep a few, plant them in pots or in the ground, and the others you can give away. Which is why if you ever buy a mangave and have it in your garden, it's going to turn into a pass-along plant.
Mm.
And then, you know, your friends and neighbors, they'll get sick of you because you always want to give them plants.
When's the best time to divide the clumps?
I'd say late spring on,
Late spring. Okay, yeah.
you know, when it's warm.
Mhm.
You can do it now, but you'd have to like bring it inside and put them on a heat mat. Outside, they will just sit there and do nothing at best, and at worst rot.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
wait. I think that goes for a lot of plants, and you know, you don't want to divide now.
Gerhard, do you think that the Mangave leaves are particularly brittle? You have to be careful.
Some of them, the ones that the Mangaves that are have predominantly manfreda genes, their leaves can be very brittle, sort of rubbery and brittle, and in shipping especially they break, or if you like weed under them, you can break the leaves off. But you know what, they in the summer they grow so fast that, you know, any leaves that you break off, they're going to be replaced with healthy leaves. And the Mangaves that are more like agaves, they have stiffer leaves, and those you really don't just accidentally break off.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm in zone 9. If you plant them in the soil, what should the soil mix be?
I'd say the kind of soil mix you would plant any succulent in, well draining. Our soil, a native soil, is clay. You know, I really don't plant anything in our soil. And what I do in the garden, I just make mounds with soil that's, you know, like 50% garden soil that, you know, a rock yard has, and you can mix it with pea gravel or pumice or DG or lava fines, anything that just creates a soil that drains quickly. That's all they need. They don't want to sit in you know, be waterlogged like many plants.
Right.
Waterlogged.
So you do it like 50-50 with drainage material and local soil.
Yeah, that's what I've done, and it's worked really well. And going back to Ellen showed the lithops. I've killed many lithops, but I recently talked to, I don't know if you, Peter Beiersdorfer, he gave a presentation at the Sacramento Succulent Society about lithops, and he said he also lost a lot of lithops, but he grows them in 100% inorganic soil now, sand and lava fines or whatever. And he says he can water the hell out of them as much as he wants, and they never rot because the water just runs right through them. Of course, use a soil like that is great. You won't have any rot, but you also got to fertilize them a lot because there are no nutrients in that soil.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. Maybe I'll repot
I'm
mine.
trying that now, you know, and so far they've lived, but
maybe I'll buy some more. I'm always tempted, but I don't always buy them because I either kill them or, you know.
Yeah, I've bought some lithops that, like, you know, and from Altman plants that come in this horrendous soil that's like peat moss or whatever. When it dries up, there's no way you can ever rehydrate it. So you just kind of like try and get as much of that soil off and plant it in better soil.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. I might have
that goes with any of their plants, because I think other growers too have a mix that's just rich in peat, and I never use peat because it dries up. It's impossible to rehydrate.
Wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. You had really nicely
I was afraid that it's so much information, but you know, I wanted to cover all the bases, and I'm excited about Mangaves because they fill a lot of, they are unique. They're like nothing else, and they really look great in the garden, you know, even if you just have one and you have a cottage garden, you know, it's a statement piece.
Yeah.
I think I saw some Mangave that you present that doesn't have the spots. Is that the new kind of agave?
There's some like Frosted Elegance is that sort of bluish greenish. It does not have any spots.
Because when I got the training with Brian Campbell in Bancroft, he said that what characteristic of the Mangave is to have those spots.
Yeah.
And now without that, how can I tell it if Mangave or not?
Well, even when you buy one in a nursery, even if it was grown in a lot of shade, if you look closely, so even if the leaves aren't purple with pronounced spotting, if you look closely, you will see the spots. You know, they're just they don't really stick out from the background leaf coloration, but they're there. So if you see the tiny little spots, you know that in full sun the plant will turn purple and the spotting will be very pronounced. But there are mangaves now that have no spots, and I think it's because the growers want to offer gardeners a huge variety. Not everybody wants a spotted purple plant, you know. Other people might want a greenish plant or a bluish plant that has no spots. And you know, that's just a huge variety out there for every taste, every color or planting scheme you could have.
Okay. Thank you. Great presentation, Gerhard.
Thank you.
Gerhard, I was wondering if all mangaves have a certain leaf texture and that you can tell that it's a mangave as opposed to something else.
No, I mean, the ones that came out first that were sort of 50% manfreda and 50% agave, they had pliable leaves, but the leaves didn't like break off as easily as a manfreda leaf would. But there's also some now that maybe genetically are like 90% agave, and they're almost, unless you know what it is, you'd think it's an agave because it has stiff leaves with teeth. Or there could be some that look like a manfreda, they just have brittle leaves. And you know, they've done so much crossing and back crossing now, and they have pollen, and it's almost like, you know, they have a spice rack and they just kind of like can throw together whatever they want the end result to be. So no, you know, it's you see one and you don't necessarily know what it is.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of unique because there is no other plant genus I know that has such a variability in terms of looks and color and what have you, and it's still all man-made.
Fascinating. And something fun to go out searching for now.
Yeah, as I said, if you live reasonably close, like in the East Bay, come to Davis and go to the plant sale. Look at it said the inventory is online. I mean, whatever you want. They have like 60 different kinds of salvias. It's insane.
Do you know when the inventory will be available for the next
Maybe
sale?
tomorrow. It might. I haven't checked today, but yeah, usually Tuesday or Wednesday before the sale. So check in tomorrow. It might be, or it might already be up.
Okey-doke.
And as I said, if you have any questions, email me at gerhard@succulentsandmore.com, and I'll be happy to, you know, answer whatever questions you have.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gerhard. We appreciate it.
Okay, good night.
Good night.